and welcome to Tech Explorer. I hope you are doing well. So today in this tutorial we are going to learn about the core functionality of Python objects and classes, and you will be learning what a class is, how to create it and how to use in your program. But before that, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe so that you can get more tutorial videos in Python and take your journey from the basic to the advanced level. So let's begin. So let's see what we will be learning today. So what is an object-oriented programming in Python? Overview of object-oriented programming terminologies. What is a class and how to define them in Python? What is an object? How to create the objects? And how to access the attributes of a class. What are the built-in class attributes? And the init function. What are object methods? The self parameter, and how to modify object properties, how to delete object properties, and how to delete the objects, and finally the pass statement. Now let's see what is object-oriented programming in Python. So Python, it's a multi-paradigm high-level programming language. Now what do you mean by high-level programming language? So the instructions that tell a computer what to do, they are written in machine code. And machine code is a series of numbers that are written in binary. And each number, they represent a different instruction. So programmers, they find the machine code difficult to learn, program and debug. And as a result, the majority of the programmers, they write their programs in high-level programming languages. And these languages, they are close to natural language, just like the spoken and the written language of human beings. So for example, if you see in Python, it uses print, if, input and while statements. And all these words are from the English language to form these instructions. So in fact, the instructions, they often look like the abbreviated English statements. Now, Python is a great programming language that supports object-oriented programming. And by object-oriented programming, we mean that it's a method of structuring a program by bundling all the related properties and behaviors into individual objects, that is, the variables and the methods. Now, one of the popular approaches to solve a programming problem is by creating objects. And you will use Python to define a class with attributes and methods. For instance, an object could represent a person with properties like name, age and address, and behaviors like walking, talking, breathing, running, etc. Now let's see some of the object-oriented programming terminologies in Python. So what is a class? A class is a user-defined prototype for an object that defines a set of attributes that characterize any object of that class. And what is a class variable? A variable is shared by all the instances of a class. Now comes the data members. So a class variable or instance variable that holds the data associated with a class and its objects. And function overloading. So the assignment of more than one behavior to a particular function is known as function overloading. What do we mean by instance variable? So a variable that is defined inside a method and belongs only to that current instance of the class. Now what is inheritance? The transfer of the characteristics of a class to other classes that are derived from it is called inheritance. What is an instance? It's an individual object of a certain class. Now what is instantiation? It's the creation of an instance of a class. And what is a method? It's a special kind of function that is defined in a class definition. And what is an object finally? It's a unique instance of a data structure that's defined by its class. And what is operator overloading? It is the assignment of more than one function to a particular operator. So these were some of the few object-oriented programming terminologies that are used in Python. Now let's see what is a class in Python. So what is a class? A class is a user-defined blueprint or prototype from which the objects are created. And it provides a means of bundling the data and the functionality together. So Python, it's an object-oriented programming language, as I've told you earlier. And almost everything in Python is an object with its properties and methods. So a class is like an object constructor or a blueprint for creating these objects. So what is the syntax for defining a class? You use the keyword class and give the class name followed by a colon. And then you have an optional documentation string that will describe what the class is about. And then finally, you will give all your statements which you want to put inside your class. So let's understand class in Python with an example. So very first, you use the keyword class to define the class, and then it is followed by the name of the class. In this example, it is employee, followed by a colon. Then comes your optional documentation string, which will describe you about the class. So here it is common base class for all the employees. So your employee class is a common base class for all the employees. Then comes your init method. You define it by using keyword def and pass two variables, name and salary, and you are initializing these two variables. So the first method, that is the init method, is a special one which is called the class constructor or initialization method that Python calls when you create a new instance of this class. So whenever you create a new object of this class, your init method is going to be called by default. Then you can declare any other functions like normal methods. So here in this example, you're defining another function that is display employee, and this is going to print the name and the salary of the employee. So like other normal functions, when you're declaring class methods, it is having an exception that the first argument to each method itself, and Python adds a self argument to the list for you. You do not need to include it when you call the methods. Now let's see what is an object of a class in Python. So an object, it's an instance of a class, and a class is like a blueprint, while the instance is a copy of that class with actual values. So when an object of a class is created, the class is said to be instantiated. And all the instances, they share the attributes and the behavior of that class. But the values of those attributes, that is the state, they are unique for each object. So a single class may have any number of instances. So now how to create objects? We are going to see from the previous class example of employee. So this would create object of employee class. So to create instance of a class, you call the class using the class name and pass whatever arguments the init method was expecting. So init method was expecting your name and salary of the employee. So you give the name of the object as employee1 and you provide all the parameters that the init method was expecting. So this is the way you create the object of a class in Python. Now let's see how to access the attributes. So attributes of a class are functions that define the corresponding methods of its instances, and they are used to implement access controls of the classes. So you access the object's attributes using the dot operator with the object. And attributes of a class, they can also be accessed using the following built-in methods and functions. So get attribute, this function is used to access the attribute of an object. Has attribute, this function is used to check if an attribute exists or not. And set attribute, this function is used to set an attribute if the attribute doesn't exist. Then it will be created first. And del attribute, this function is used to delete an attribute. If you're accessing the attribute after deleting it, then it is going to raise an error class has no. Now let's see how to access the attributes with example. So here you create your class employee and you are having your first method, that is the init method, in the initialization method where you are initializing two variables, that is name and salary. Name with value John and salary with value 25,000. Then you are having another function, that is show, where you are printing the values of name and salary. Now you are creating an object of the class employee E1. And then you are using the get attribute method to access the name attribute of object E1. So when you're printing this, you are getting the value John. Then you are using the has attribute to check whether this name attribute is existing or not. So as name is present, you are going to get true. Then you are using the set attribute method to set a new attribute height with the value 152. So first it is going to check whether height exists or not. If height doesn't exist, it is going to create that attribute and then initialize its value with 152. And when you're printing it by using the get attribute method that is accessing the height attribute, you're going to get the value 152. And then finally you are using del attribute to delete the salary attribute of employee. Now let's see what are the built-in class attributes in Python. So every Python class keeps following built-in attributes and they can be accessed using the dot operator like any other attribute. So this is a dictionary containing the class namespace. Doc, it's a class documentation string or none if undefined. And name, that's a class name. And module, it is the module name in which the class is defined. So this attribute is main in interactive mode. And then come the bases. It's a possibly empty tuple containing the base classes in the order of the occurrence in the base class list. So now let's see the init function in Python. So all classes, they have a function called init. And this is always executed when the class has been instantiated. So the init function is used to assign the values to object properties or other operations that are necessary to do when the object has been created. So here we will understand it with an example. So this is your class person and you are having the first method, that is the init method. You may call it as a constructor also, and you are passing two variables name and age. So it is initializing its own variables name and age with the parameters which you have passed to it. And then when you are creating the object of the class person, that is P1 object, you have to pass all those arguments whatever the init is expecting, that is name and age. So you have passed John and age is 36. Now when you're printing the name, that is the variable of this class, you are using the object dot the variable name, that is p1.name and p1.age. You are going to get John and 36. Now let's understand what are object methods in Python. So objects, they can also contain methods, and methods, they are defined inside the body of a class. So methods in objects, they are functions that belong to the object and they define the behavior of the objects. So let's understand with the help of an example. So here you're having class person, then you're having your init method and it is taking two parameters, that is name and age, and initializing two variables of the class, that is self.name and self.age. And you are having a method my function which is printing hello my name is, the self.name, that is a variable which you have passed in the init method. Now you're creating the object of the class person, that is P1, and you're calling the class by using the class name, and in the parentheses you're providing the two values or the two parameters that init method is expecting. So you're passing John for name and 36 for age. So your object P1 has been created. Now you can call the method of the class, that is my function, by using the object name and the dot operator, that is p1.myfunction. So when you're calling this, you're going to get hello my name is John. Now let's see the self parameter. So the self parameter is a reference to the current instance of the class, and it is used to access the variables that belong to the class. So it does not have to be named as self, you can call it whatever you like, but it has to be the first parameter of any function in the class. And you can give init any number of parameters, but the first parameter will always be a variable that is called self. Now, when a new class instance is created, the instance is automatically passed to the self parameter in init method so that new attributes can be defined on that object. Let's see an example. Here you are having class person and this is your init method, and the very first parameter of the init method is self, and there are other two values also, that is name and age parameter. So you are using self.name and initializing them with the value that you have received in the init method. Similarly, self.age equal to age. Now you can modify the object properties also. So let's see how to modify the properties of an object with the help of an example. So here it is your class person and you're having your init method. Self is the by default parameter and it is expecting two arguments, that is name and age. And then it is initializing two variables with the values it has received when the object is created. So it is having another function, that's my function, and it is printing hello my name is, the value of name. Now you're creating the object of this class person by calling the class name and passing two values because your init method is expecting two values, name and age. So you're giving John for name and 36 for age. Now, when your object is created, you are having the values of name as John and age value is 36. Now you can modify the object property by calling the object and the dot operator and the property name. So p1.age equal to 40. So now when you're printing p1.age, instead of getting 36, you're going to get 40. Now let's see how to delete the object properties. So you're having your class person, and then you're having your init method, self parameter by default, and it is expecting two arguments, name and age. It is initializing two variables, that is self.name equal to name and self.age equal to age. So these are the values which it is receiving when the object of the class is created. Then you're having another method, that is my function, and it is printing hello my name is self.name. Now you're creating the object of this class, that is p1, by calling the class name person and passing two values, that is John and 36. So value of name and value of age. So when this object is created, your name variable is going to have John and age is going to have 36. Now using the del keyword and then deleting the object property age. Now when you're printing p1.age, it is going to give you attribute error, that is person object has no attribute age because you have already deleted the age attribute. Now let's see how to delete the objects. So here we are using the same example, that is a class of a person. You are having an init method which is expecting two values, that is name and age. It is initializing two attributes, name and age. And then you're having a function, my function, it is printing hello my name is self.name. And then you're creating the object p1 by calling the class name person and passing two values, that is John for name and 36 for age. Now you're using the del keyword again to delete the object p1. Now when you're printing p1, you're going to get a name error, that is p1 is not defined. So finally we are going to see the pass statement. So class definitions, they cannot be empty. But if for some reason you have a class definition with no content, put in the pass statement to avoid getting an error. So let's see with an example. You're having a class person, and as you're having no content, simply put the pass statement. So you're not going to get an error. So having an empty class definition like this would raise an error without the pass statement. Now this was all about the classes and objects in Python. If you have any query, any doubt, do let me know in the comment section below. I would be really happy to help you out. And if you have enjoyed my video, do like, subscribe and share my channel so that you can get more tutorial videos in Python and I can take your journey from the beginners to the advanced level. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.